Captain Sarah Mitchell's hands trembled slightly as she stirred the massive aluminum pot of beef stew, the wooden spoon scraping against the bottom with rhythmic, hypnotic sounds. Steam rose in thick clouds around her face, fogging her vision, but she didn't move away. The heat felt like punishment, and right now, she accepted it willingly. Through the small porthole window in the kitchen door, she could see Major strutting down the corridor with 3 visiting generals, their dress uniforms pristine and adorned with medals that represented decades of prestigious service. Her jaw clenched involuntarily as she heard his voice, deliberately loud, deliberately clear, meant to carry through the kitchen walls. "That's our little kitchen wench over there," announced with a sneer, gesturing dismissively toward the kitchen. "Used to think she was a sniper until she got soldiers killed. Now she makes soup." The general's laughter echoed through the corridors like knives, sharp and cruel. Sarah's hands gripped the wooden spoon so tightly her knuckles turned white. She forced herself to keep stirring, keep moving, keep breathing. The injustice of it burned in her chest like molten metal, threatening to consume her from the inside out. 6 months. It had been exactly 6 months since that operation went catastrophically wrong. Sarah had been positioned on a ridge overlooking the valley, her rifle steady, her breathing controlled, her mind crystal clear. The intelligence briefing had been explicit: eliminate the target at coordinates 77325. She had lined up the shot perfectly. The target was in her crosshairs. She had taken the shot. But what nobody told her, what the commanding officer responsible for that briefing would later claim he forgot to mention, was that friendly forces had moved into that same zone without updating tactical communications. 1 bullet, 2 soldiers dead. Immediately, fingers pointed everywhere except toward the officer who'd failed to update the grid coordinates. Sarah became the scapegoat. The court-martial was swift, brutal, and predetermined. They couldn't prove gross negligence, but they didn't need to. The narrative was already written. Captain Mitchell failed to verify friendly positions before engaging target. Her decorated career, 8 years of perfect service, 14 confirmed kills, 2 commendations for valor, evaporated like morning mist. She wasn't discharged, which would have been merciful. Instead, she was reassigned to kitchen duty at Forward Operating Base Sentinel, a remote mountain installation surrounded by hostile territory. Punishment without discharge, humiliation without escape. And Major had made it his personal crusade to destroy whatever dignity she had remaining. From day one, he'd found excuses to visit the kitchen to criticize everything. The coffee was too weak. The portions were inconsistent. The vegetables were chopped incorrectly. He'd stand in the doorway with his arms crossed, his eyes cold and calculating, watching for any mistake he could amplify. Worse, he did it in front of soldiers, enlisted personnel who looked at Sarah with something between pity and confusion. How could a decorated officer be reduced to this? How could the military system be so unjust? Sarah had learned early on not to defend herself verbally, wanted her to snap back, to give him ammunition for additional disciplinary action. So she'd simply nod, acknowledge his criticisms, and continue her work with meticulous precision. She poured everything into those meals, the same focus and discipline she'd once applied to rifle scope adjustments and ballistic calculations. The stew she was making right now. It contained 23 ingredients, each one selected for flavor and nutritional value. The bread cooling on the racks had been proofed for exactly 6 hours. The vegetables were cut to uniform sizes. Nothing was done carelessly. This was her rebellion, excellence in the face of degradation. But underneath that calm exterior, something was boiling. Sarah could feel it in her bones, in her blood, in the tremor of her hands that she had to consciously control. It was the feeling of injustice crystallizing into something harder, something sharper. She knew better than to act on it rashly. She was a trained soldier, a professional. Emotions were weapons that could backfire if handled carelessly. So she channeled that rage into her work, into maintaining perfect military bearing, into the secret rituals she performed when no one was watching. The general's laughter finally faded as led them away from the kitchen. Sarah exhaled slowly, releasing tension from her shoulders. Around her, the kitchen staff worked quietly, avoiding her eyes. Her. That was almost worse than contempt. She was a decorated warrior, reduced to an object of pity, serving food to soldiers who'd never know the truth about her. As she continued stirring the massive pot of stew, Sarah made herself a silent promise. This wouldn't be her permanent reality. Somehow, she would prove the world wrong. She would reclaim her name, her reputation, her honor. The question was only how, and when opportunity would finally arrive. She had no idea it was less than 3 months away. Lieutenant couldn't sleep. Again. For the third night in a row, he'd been lying in his bunk staring at the ceiling of the barracks, his mind churning with questions that wouldn't leave him alone. He'd overheard conversations in the mess hall, whispered comments about Captain Mitchell, fragmented stories about her past, rumors that seemed too extraordinary to be true. At 2 a.m., unable to tolerate his own restlessness any longer, made a decision that could have serious consequences if discovered. He quietly dressed, slipped out of the barracks, and made his way toward the armory building. The base was silent at this hour, bathed in moonlight that cast long, ghostly shadows across the compound. Moved carefully, staying in the shadows, avoiding the patrol routes he'd memorized during his weeks here. The armory was locked, naturally, but as a junior officer with certain clearances, he possessed a key. His heart hammered against his ribs as he inserted it into the lock, half expecting an alarm to sound. Nothing. The door swung open silently. That's when he saw her. Captain Sarah Mitchell stood in the center of the armory, silhouetted against the moonlight streaming through the high windows. She held a rifle, not casually, not carelessly, but with something that could only describe as reverence. Her movements were slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. She held the weapon vertically, examining it from multiple angles, her eye tracing the barrel, the scope, every mechanism with surgical precision. In the pale moonlight, she looked like a ghost, a specter of her former self, communing with the only thing that seemed to make sense anymore. Froze, not wanting to startle her, but she sensed his presence immediately. Her head turned with mechanical smoothness, her hand moving to rest the rifle against her chest. Her eyes, even in the darkness, could see their intensity, fixed on him with lethal focus. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, "Lieutenant," her voice was steady, controlled, dangerous. "This is a secured area." Swallowed hard. "So is this, Captain, which means you shouldn't be here either." It was bold, perhaps foolish, but he'd already committed to the risk. "I came looking for you, and I found you." Sarah's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes, a moment of consideration, perhaps even respect. She lowered the rifle slightly. "I'm just maintaining discipline, nothing more." At 2 a.m., with a rifle, alone, stepped further into the armory, closing the door quietly behind him. "I don't think so, Captain. I think you're something more than the kitchen assignment everyone believes. I think you're breaking." The words hung in the air between them like a live grenade. Sarah's jaw tightened, and for a moment, thought she might eject him forcibly from the armory. Instead, she set the rifle down carefully on the maintenance table and turned to face him fully. In the moonlight, he could see the exhaustion etched into her features, the weight of months of humiliation written in every line of her face. "Why do you care?" she asked quietly. "Why does any of this matter to you?" "Because I know how to read a file," replied. "I know how to access personnel records, and because I couldn't let the injustice sit quietly." He paused, gauging her reaction. "I found your original service record, Captain, before the reassignment, before the court-martial." Sarah's entire body went rigid. "That's classified information, Lieutenant. How did you?" "I have contacts in records. It doesn't matter how." Moved closer, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. "What matters is that I know the truth. I know you held the longest confirmed kill in regimental history, 2847 meters. I know you trained elite snipers. I know you saved countless lives. And I know that none of that was your fault. The intelligence briefing failure, the miscommunication, the friendly fire incident, none of it was your fault." Sarah turned away from him, her shoulders tense. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. Knowing the truth and being able to do anything about it are two different things, Lieutenant. Maybe not, said carefully. What if the truth started spreading? What if soldiers began remembering who you actually are? That would be career suicide for whoever spread it, Sarah replied bitterly. Has friends in high places. He'd bury anyone who challenged his narrative. Not if enough people knew, countered. Not if the narrative started spreading organically, soldier to soldier, in mess lines and barracks conversations. You can't silence an entire battalion. Sarah turned back to face him and in her eyes saw something shift, a tiny spark of hope, carefully contained but unmistakably present. Why would you risk your career for this, Lieutenant? For me. Held her gaze steadily. Because I believe in justice, Captain, and because some people are worth the risk. Over the next week began his careful work. He mentioned Sarah's background to trusted soldiers in casual conversations. He let facts slip during card games. He reminded people of her expertise whenever the opportunity arose. And slowly, subtly, the perception began to change. Soldiers started watching Sarah differently, not with pity, but with curiosity, then recognition, then something approaching reverence. When barked orders, she obeyed with perfect military bearing, but the enlisted personnel saw something different now. They saw a caged warrior, a powder keg waiting to explode, and they whispered her legend into existence, one conversation at a time. The secret was becoming dangerous. The radio transmission crackled through the command center at 5:47 hours, shattering the pre-dawn silence like a bullet through glass. The voice on the other end was panicked, breathless, operating on pure adrenaline and fear. Every word was clipped, urgent, desperate. Base Sentinel, this is Forward Team 7. We are under fire. Repeat, we are taking active fire from elevated position. Sniper position, unknown range, 1 KIA, 2 WIA. We are pinned down and static consumed the rest of the transmission, cutting off mid-sentence in a way that made everyone in the command center's blood run cold. Colonel Harrison's face went pale as porcelain. His coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. Around him, officers and enlisted personnel straightened in their chairs, the casual morning routines vanishing like smoke. This wasn't a drill. This wasn't a training exercise. This was the real thing, soldiers in the field taking fire, dying. Get me more information, Harrison commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Where's Forward Team 7? What's their last known position? Sir, they were conducting joint patrol operations in the mountain pass, approximately 20 kilometers northeast. A young lieutenant responded, fingers flying across his keyboard. U.S. Afghan security team, 12 personnel total. Last check-in was 4:30 hours, all secure. No indication of hostile activity. Until now, Harrison muttered darkly. He was already moving, his mind calculating variables with the precision of a chess master. This was his job, managing combat situations, coordinating resources, making impossible decisions. But knowing the theory and executing under pressure were vastly different challenges. Major materialized in the command center like a predatory animal sensing blood in the water. His eyes gleamed with something that made several officers unconsciously step back. This was his opportunity. This was his chance to prove himself, to demonstrate the tactical prowess that had been gathering dust behind a desk. His hand was already reaching toward the weapons rack. Sir, I'll handle this, announced with the confidence of someone who'd never truly been tested. His chest puffed out, his jaw set in what he clearly believed was a heroic expression. Authorize me to take position on the eastern ridge. I can acquire target and neutralize the threat. Colonel Harrison, already overwhelmed with coordination responsibilities, nodded without hesitation. Approved. Take Martinez as your spotter and go. Time is critical. The decision would haunt him later. But in that moment, with soldiers dying in the field, he didn't have the luxury of doubt. moved with surprising speed, gathering equipment with the confidence of someone who trained extensively but never actually fought. He selected a high-powered rifle from the rack, checked the magazine twice, and strapped on tactical gear. Within 10 minutes, he and his spotter were heading toward the eastern ridge, his expression radiating absolute certainty. He was going to save the day. He was going to be the hero. The reality would be considerably different. As positioned himself on the ridge overlooking the valley, he could see the situation below. A small team of American and Afghan soldiers pinned down behind limited cover, muzzle flashes indicating their desperate attempts to return fire. But the enemy sniper wasn't visible. That was the problem. An invisible enemy was impossible to fight. Scanned the opposing with his scope, searching for any sign of the sniper's position. Nothing. The mountains were vast, filled with 1,000 possible hiding places. He made his first shot, a wild, desperate attempt at suppressing fire in the general direction he guessed the sniper might be positioned. The bullet went nowhere near the target. Below, the pinned team continued taking fire, fired again, and again. Each shot was less accurate than the last, his confidence crumbling as the reality of combat registered. This wasn't a training exercise. This wasn't a simulation. A real sniper, someone far more skilled than himself, was operating on another level entirely. "Sir, I'm not acquiring target," Martinez, his spotter, reported with barely concealed panic. "The shooter is too far out, too well concealed. We need different positioning or—" "I've got this," snapped, already doubting himself but refusing to admit it. He fired again. This time, the enemy sniper responded. A bullet cracked past his position so close he could feel the displacement in the air. He dove behind a boulder, his heart threatening to explode out of his chest. Below, another soldier fell. Then another. The enemy sniper was methodical, professional, absolutely lethal. Attempts at countermeasures were proving not just ineffective but counterproductive. Every shot he fired revealed his position without achieving anything. The pinned team's ammunition was diminishing. Their tactical situation was deteriorating. In the command center, Colonel Harrison received the status updates with growing horror. The situation was becoming a massacre. His efforts were failing spectacularly. The pinned team had perhaps 5 more minutes before they ran out of ammunition completely. After that, it would be a bloodbath. "Sir, we need our best marksman in the field," someone said quietly. "Not." Harrison's mind raced through possibilities. Who did they have? Who could operate at that extreme range against an enemy sniper who was clearly operating at the highest levels of skill and professionalism? There was only one option, and it would require him to make a decision that would either save lives or destroy careers. "Get me Captain Mitchell," he commanded. Now. Sarah Mitchell was elbow-deep in dishwater when Sergeant burst through the kitchen door like a man possessed, his face flushed crimson, his eyes wide with urgency. The other kitchen staff froze mid-motion, sensing something had shifted in the fabric of their day. The sergeant's breathing came in short, sharp bursts as if he'd been running. "Captain Mitchell," announced, his voice carrying the weight of command. "Colonel needs you, combat situation, now." The entire mess hall fell silent. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Hands paused over plates. Everyone knew what this meant. Everyone understood the implication of being called from kitchen duty to a combat situation. Sarah's hands remained submerged in the soapy water for a full 3 seconds longer than necessary. A moment of deliberate control, of forcing her body not to react too quickly, not to betray the electric surge of adrenaline suddenly flooding her system. Her hands slowly, deliberately, meeting eyes with absolute calm. "Tell the colonel I'm on my way." The kitchen erupted into barely contained chaos the moment she left. Whispers exploded like scattered gunfire. "Did you hear? Captain Mitchell? Finally? What does this mean?" The kitchen staff exchanged glances that mixed hope with fear. The legend was being tested. The impossible might become possible. Sarah walked toward the armory with perfect military posture, each step measured and controlled, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged animal desperate for freedom. Her mind was already operating at combat velocity, cycling through possibilities, protocols, contingencies. A combat situation meant soldiers were in danger. It meant lives hung in the balance. It meant her skills, the ones she'd maintained in secret midnight sessions, were suddenly, desperately needed. The armory door was already open. Her rifle waited for her, that beautiful, familiar instrument of death and precision that she'd cleaned 1,000 times, adjusted 1,000 times, lived within her mind 1,000 times more. The rifle was her language, her art form, her soul rendered in steel and wood and ballistic mathematics. Colonel Harrison met her just inside the threshold, his face etched with lines of desperation and controlled panic. In 30 years of military service, Sarah had learned to read officers instantly. Harrison was operating on fumes, making rapid decisions under impossible pressure, and he was terrified that those decisions were failing. "Captain Mitchell," he began, and something in his voice, a note of respect that hadn't been there before, made her pay attention. "I need to be direct. Forward Team 7 is pinned down in the mountain pass. 1 KIA, 2 WIA, more casualties mounting. Enemy sniper has them completely contained. We have major attempting countermeasures from the eastern ridge, but the target distance is extreme. Too extreme for standard engagement." Sarah's mind was already calculating. "How extreme, sir?" "Preliminary estimates put the sniper at approximately 5,300 meters, Harrison replied. "I know it's beyond normal effective range. I know it's nearly impossible. But—" "It's possible," Sarah interrupted quietly, and she saw something flicker across Harrison's face, relief mixed with hope mixed with doubt. "Difficult, yes. Impossible, no. Unlikely, but not impossible." Harrison met her eyes, and she saw the weight of command bearing down on him. "I wouldn't ask if I had any other options, Captain, but I need you to try. I need you to at least attempt this. Those soldiers down there, they're going to die if we don't do something immediately." Sarah nodded once sharply and moved toward the equipment rack. She selected a specialized long-range rifle, the kind designed specifically for extreme distance work. Her hands moved with automatic precision, checking chambers, verifying ammunition specifications, confirming sight alignment. Every motion was pure muscle memory layered atop years of intensive training. "I'll need a spotter," she said, not looking up from her equipment preparation. "Jackson, one of our best," Harrison confirmed. "He's already being, Captain, I want you to know," he paused, seeming to struggle with words. "I want you to know that I believe in you. That's not just military necessity talking, that's genuine belief." Sarah looked up at him then, and in his eyes, she saw genuine remorse for the months of injustice, genuine respect for her capabilities, genuine understanding of what she'd endured. The apology he couldn't quite voice hung between them like a living thing. "I won't miss, sir," she said simply. She emerged from the armory in full tactical gear, her movements economical and precise. The rifle hung ready in her hands. Around the compound, soldiers stopped what they were doing. Word had spread. Captain Mitchell was being deployed. The legend was being activated. And then she saw Major's face. He was just returning from his failed attempt on the ridge, his uniform dusty, his expression a mixture of rage and humiliation. When he spotted Sarah in combat gear, when he understood what was happening, his face transformed into something almost apoplectic. "Absolutely not," he roared, striding directly toward her. "Colonel, you cannot be serious. You're sending the kitchen staff, this disgraced officer, out on a combat mission. She'll get more soldiers killed. She's a jinx, a liability, That's enough, Major." Colonel Harrison's voice cut through like winter ice. "Captain Mitchell is being deployed per my direct command. You will stand down." "Sir, this is a catastrophic mistake." His voice had risen to a shout. "She's just the cook. She's been making soup for 6 months. She can't." "She can, and she will," Harrison replied coldly. Because unlike some officers, Captain Mitchell actually possesses the skills required for this mission. Now step aside, or I'll have you removed. Sarah walked past without acknowledging him. His impotent rage fueled her, crystallized her focus, sharpened her intent. Behind her, she heard his voice still ranting, still protesting, still unable to accept that his moment of glory had been stolen by someone he'd spent 6 months systematically humiliating. This was her moment, and she would not waste it. The mountain ridge was a brutal landscape of jagged rock, sparse vegetation, an unforgiving wind that seemed determined to knock Sarah sideways with every step. She ascended with Jackson, her spotter, moving in complete silence, conserving energy, maintaining absolute focus. The elevation climbed mercilessly 10,000 feet, then 11,000, then pushing toward 12,000. With each meter gained, the air grew thinner, colder, more hostile to human life. Sarah's lungs burned with every breath. Her thighs screamed in protest as she forced her legs to continue climbing. The weight of the rifle, the tactical gear, the ammunition, normally negligible, now felt like an anvil strapped to her body. But her mind remained crystal clear, operating at a frequency beyond physical pain. She'd trained for this. Her body was screaming, but her consciousness existed on a different plane entirely. Jackson struggled beside her, his younger legs pumping, his breathing ragged and labored. "How much further, Captain?" he gasped. "Until we have a clear line of sight," Sarah replied, not even breathing hard despite the physical demands. "Until we're above the enemy position, until we have every possible advantage." They crested the final ridge at 12,000 feet, the wind here absolutely vicious, trying to physically tear them from the mountainside. Sarah immediately began establishing her position, her movements economical and practiced. Jackson set up the equipment with shaking hands, the laser range finder, the wind meter, the ballistics computer that would translate physics into mathematical certainty. Sarah positioned herself prone on the rocky ground, her body finding purchase against the unforgiving stone. Through her scope, the valley below resolved into crystalline clarity, and there in the distance, barely visible even through magnification, she could see the enemy sniper's position, a small outcropping of rock on the opposing ridge, perhaps 5,300 meters away. The figure was small, almost insignificant, but Sarah could sense the skill radiating from that position. This was a professional. This was someone operating at the highest levels of their craft. "Preliminary calculations coming in," Jackson reported, his voice shaking slightly as he worked the ballistics computer. 5,287 meters, wind gusts between 12 and 18 knots, predominantly from the northwest. Target elevation approximately 400 meters lower than our position. Atmospheric pressure nominal for this altitude. Temperature holding at -8 degrees Celsius. Sarah absorbed the information without responding, her eye remaining fixed on the scope. The numbers were terrifying in their implications. At this distance, even slight miscalculations would result in complete miss. The bullet would take approximately 4 seconds to reach its destination, 4 seconds during which atmospheric conditions could shift, wind could gust unexpectedly, the target could move. 4 seconds containing infinite variables. "Bullet drop will be approximately 15 meters, Jackson continued, his fingers flying across the computer. "Windage compensation, approximately 2.3 meters to the left. Spin drift negligible at this range but present. You're looking at an effective elevation adjustment of 0.8 mils, windage adjustment of 0.4 mils. Sarah mentally logged every number, allowing the calculations to integrate into her muscle memory. She'd performed this same procedure 1,000 times in training, but this was different. This was real. Those weren't paper targets 5,300 meters away. That was a human being. A professional killer currently engaged in murdering American and Afghan soldiers. "Final range confirmation," Jackson said, his voice steadying as he performed the ritual of preparation. 5,300 meters. That's 5.3 kilometers, 3.3 miles, beyond standard effective range by nearly 2 kilometers. Noted, Sarah replied, her voice completely calm. The distance was absurd. The probability of success was minimal. The margin for error was essentially non-existent. And yet here she was, about to attempt exactly that. She began adjusting her scope, making minute corrections that were nonetheless critical. A fraction of a millimeter at her position translated to meters of variance at 5,300 meters downrange. Her fingers worked with surgical precision, each click of the adjustment mechanism a small prayer, a small calculation, a small commitment to the impossible. Below them, in the valley, the radio crackled with urgent transmissions. The pinned team was running out of ammunition. Casualties were mounting. Time had become the most precious resource. The trapped soldiers had perhaps 3 minutes before their situation became completely untenable. Sarah's breathing became meditation. She forced her body into absolute stillness, eliminating any movement that might affect the shot. Her heart rate dropped to 55 beats per minute, her combat pulse, the rate where her body functioned optimally. Jackson lay beside her, his role now complete. The calculations were done. The variable were input. Now it came down to physics, skill, and fate. The insurgent sniper appeared in her scope, adjusting his position for another shot that would finish the trapped team. He had no idea, no comprehension, no warning. Death was traveling toward him at 2,700 miles per hour, launched from a distance so extreme that it seemed to belong to science fiction rather than military reality. Sarah's finger found the trigger. Not pressing, just resting there, waiting for the moment when everything would align. Her breathing cycle, the wind pattern, the target's position, the mathematical certainty of ballistic trajectory. The universe compressed into this single moment. Everything she'd suffered, every month in the kitchen, every humiliation from, every whispered doubt about her capabilities, every ounce of rage, focus, and determination distilled into one perfect action. She exhaled completely. She squeezed. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. The report echoed across the mountains like thunder announcing Judgment Day. Jackson's eyes went wide as he watched through the spotter scope, tracking the impossible trajectory downrange. For 4 endless seconds, nothing happened. Then the enemy sniper's position erupted in violent chaos. The investigation began immediately, moving through military channels with the speed of a guided missile. Colonel Harrison personally initiated the inquiry, pulling together officers and specialists to examine every facet of Sarah's original reassignment. The questions were pointed and specific. Why had a decorated marksman been relegated to kitchen duty? What exactly had occurred during that fateful operation 6 months ago? Who had authorized the reassignment? What evidence supported the court-martial recommendation? The deeper they dug, the uglier the truth became. Files were retrieved from secure archives. Personnel records were cross-referenced. Communications logs from that operation were examined with forensic precision. And what emerged was a picture of calculated deception and systematic scapegoating that made even the most cynical officers uncomfortable. The friendly fire incident, the event that had destroyed Sarah's career, hadn't been her fault at all. It had been a catastrophic intelligence failure by a senior officer who deliberately updated grid coordinates from tactical personnel. Sarah had shot exactly where she'd been ordered to shoot. The problem was that the coordinates she'd been given were dangerously outdated. Friendly forces had repositioned without proper notification reaching the sniper team. In military terminology, it was a communication failure. In human terms, it was a tragedy. In legal terms, it was someone else's responsibility. But instead of accepting that responsibility, the senior officer in question, now conveniently stationed stateside, had reviewed the incident report and made a decision. He would allow Sarah to take the fall. The court-martial would focus on her alleged failure to verify friendly positions, a charge that was technically defensible but ultimately a distortion of the actual facts. Sarah would be discredited, reassigned, and effectively silenced. The officer would retain his career, his reputation, his pension. Except now that narrative was crumbling under scrutiny. Major found himself at the epicenter of a different but equally damaging investigation. Officers began cataloging his documented treatment of Sarah, the public humiliations, the mocking comments, the deliberate attempts to undermine her authority and credibility. Over 100 witnesses were prepared to testify about his behavior. Sergeants reported conversations where had explicitly mocked her. Junior officers documented his dismissive comments about her capabilities. The kitchen staff provided detailed accounts of his harassment. What had seemed like minor administrative bullying suddenly looked like systematic psychological abuse designed to further destroy an already damaged officer. Worse, it looked calculated and malicious. Higher command took notice, very high command. Officers arrived at Forward Operating Base Sentinel on a transport helicopter, their uniforms pristine, their expressions grim. They moved with the particular gravity of men and women who dealt with the most serious violations of military conduct. They conducted interviews. They requested files. They examined communications. And with each passing hour, Major's face grew progressively paler. Sarah was informed of her exoneration in a private meeting with Colonel Harrison. He couldn't quite meet her eyes as he explained the findings. His voice wavered with something that might have been genuine remorse or might have been professional discomfort. Sarah couldn't quite tell. Perhaps it was both. The investigation confirms that your original reassignment was based on incomplete and misleading information, Harrison said carefully, reading from an official document. You are hereby formally exonerated of all charges related to the friendly fire incident of 6 months ago. Your service record will be corrected to reflect this exoneration. Your court-martial recommendation is hereby vacated. Sarah listened without expression, her hands folded in her lap. The vindication felt abstract, almost unreal. The injustice had been so concrete, so persistent, so overwhelming that its reversal seemed to belong to fantasy rather than reality. There's more, Harrison continued. Given your demonstrated capabilities and the heroic nature of your recent actions in the field, you are being promoted to major, effective immediately. Furthermore, you're being given command of a new precision marksmanship training program. You'll have authority to shape curriculum, select personnel, and establish protocols. Essentially, you'll be designing the future of our long-range combat capabilities. Sarah's breath caught slightly at that. Major, not captain. Major. The rank carried weight, authority, respect. It was a position she'd have occupied years ago if events had unfolded differently. I'm sorry, Captain Major, Harrison corrected himself, and she heard genuine regret in his voice. This should never have happened. The institutional failure here is profound and inexcusable. As Sarah left the office, she passed Major being escorted by 2 military police officers. His face was absolutely gray, his eyes hollow with the realization that his career was effectively over. A desk assignment stateside in his personnel file permanently was the military equivalent of exile. He would finish his service in obscurity, his promotion prospects dead, his command authority stripped, his reputation in tatters. Sarah met his eyes for just a moment. She saw his rage, his humiliation, his desperate desire to lash out, and she felt nothing. The satisfaction she'd imagined feeling, the triumph of watching him fall, never materialized. Instead, there was only a hollow emptiness and a strange sense of pity for a man too small to rise above his own inadequacies. The military investigation into the senior officer stateside was ongoing, but everyone understood the trajectory. He would face charges. His career would end in disgrace. The system, while imperfect, was moving toward justice. Sarah's 5,300-meter shot had done more than save lives. It had triggered an avalanche of accountability that was reshaping the entire narrative of her reassignment. One perfect bullet had pierced through bureaucratic lies and exposed the truth. The legend had become undeniable, and the reckoning was only beginning. The ceremony took place on the parade grounds of Forward Operating Base Sentinel, under a crystalline mountain sky that seemed to stretch forever. Every soldier on base had been assembled, standing at attention in perfect formation. The Afghan security personnel who'd been pinned down in that valley stood at the front, their faces marked by gratitude and respect. The air itself seemed charged with significance, aware that something momentous was occurring. Colonel Harrison stood on the small platform with Sarah at his side. He held a citation in his hands, and his voice carried across the parade grounds with the formal cadence of military tradition. His words were carefully chosen, official in tone, yet unmistakably sincere. "Captain Sarah Mitchell," he began, and the entire base seemed to lean forward. "Your actions on this date, conducted under extreme duress and at distances previously considered impossible, resulted in the neutralization of a hostile sniper and the preservation of friendly forces. More than that, your actions demonstrated the fundamental military virtues: courage, discipline, excellence under pressure, and unwavering commitment to the protection of your fellow soldiers." Harrison paused, allowing the words to settle. "Effective immediately, you are promoted to the rank of major. You are hereby authorized to wear the insignia of your new rank, and you are commended for valor in combat." The base erupted in controlled cheers. Soldiers who'd eaten her meals for 6 months, who'd watched her humiliation with barely concealed rage, who'd whispered her legend in barracks and mess halls, now cheered her vindication openly. The sound was thunderous, genuine, profoundly moving. Sarah stepped forward and accepted the formal commendation from Harrison. She could see in his eyes something that looked like paternal pride mixed with profound regret. This ceremony couldn't undo the months of injustice, but it represented institutional acknowledgement that wrong had been committed and was now being corrected. But the most significant moment came when Sarah was allowed to address the assembled personnel. She stepped to the microphone, her bearing absolutely perfect, her expression carefully neutral. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but carried to every corner of the parade grounds through sheer intensity. "I want to address what happened here," she began. "Not the shot, that was simply mathematics and training applied under pressure. I want to address the reassignment, the humiliation, the systematic effort to erase my credibility." A profound silence descended. Soldiers held their breath. "Major made a critical error," Sarah continued. "He believed that excellence could be suppressed through assignment and mockery. He believed that skill could be diminished through rank reduction and public contempt. He was wrong. You cannot destroy what is essential in a person through administrative action. You cannot erase training through humiliation. Discipline doesn't evaporate because you're made to cook instead of fight." She paused, letting that sink in. "What I want to announce is this. I am establishing a new precision marksmanship training program. This program will be open to all qualified personnel, regardless of rank, regardless of past conflicts, regardless of institutional politics. We will train the finest long-range marksmen the military has ever seen. We will establish new standards of excellence, and we will do it with absolute fairness and integrity." Another pause. Sarah's eyes moved across the assembled personnel, making contact with dozens of soldiers simultaneously. "This program will teach you that excellence is its own vindication, that truth has a way of emerging, that patience is a weapon, and that one perfect moment, executed with absolute precision, can change everything." The cheers that followed were deafening. In the following weeks, Major was officially reassigned to a desk position at Pentagon Administration, a posting that effectively ended his combat career. The paperwork detailing his documented harassment of Sarah became part of his permanent record, visible to every officer who reviewed his file. His promotion prospects, already dim, were completely extinguished. He would finish his military service in obscurity, a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimating people and abusing authority. The senior officer stateside, the one whose intelligence failure had originally destroyed Sarah's career, faced formal charges. Courts-martial proceeded. His career ended in disgrace. Military justice, while imperfect, had moved toward accountability. But Sarah's focus wasn't on or the distant officer, it was forward. She began selecting instructors for her new program, not based on rank or seniority, but on demonstrated excellence and integrity. She established curriculum that pushed beyond traditional parameters, incorporating advanced ballistics, extreme distance engagement protocols, psychological resilience training, and ethical frameworks for combat decision-making. 1 week after the ceremony, Sarah returned to the base kitchen during her afternoon break. The staff erupted in excited greetings. She spent 3 hours there, rolling up her sleeves and cooking alongside them, preparing dinner for the entire base. She explained that her connection to the kitchen would never disappear, that feeding soldiers was a form of service just as important as combat operations. "You gave me dignity when everyone else was trying to strip it away," she told the kitchen staff. "I won't forget that. This place will always be part of who I am." As Sarah left the kitchen that evening, she passed the mess hall where hundreds of soldiers were eating the meal she'd helped prepare. They stood when they saw her, a spontaneous gesture of respect that made her chest tighten with emotion. These were her people. These were the soldiers she'd fought for, would continue to fight for, would dedicate her career to training and protecting. The cook had become major. The humiliated had become vindicated. The scapegoat had become legend. And the impossible had become inevitable. 3 years later, Major Sarah Mitchell stood before a class of 150 elite trainees in the state-of-the-art facility that had become synonymous with precision marksmanship excellence. The building itself was a testament to her vision, constructed with input from ballistics specialists, equipped with advanced technology, designed to push human capability to its absolute limits. On the walls hung photographs of her graduates, many of whom had become decorated snipers themselves, their own impossible shots now part of military folklore. The current class represented the cream of the crop, soldiers selected from bases worldwide, individuals who possessed the combination of technical skill, psychological discipline, and unwavering commitment required for extreme-distance marksmanship. They watched Sarah with something approaching reverence, aware that they were being trained by a living legend. 5,300 meters, Sarah announced, writing the number on the whiteboard. That distance represents the outer boundary of human possibility in precision marksmanship. It is simultaneously the most famous and the most misunderstood shot in modern military history. And I want you to understand something fundamental. That shot was not luck. It was not accident. It was the inevitable result of disciplined training, psychological preparation, and mathematical precision, applied under circumstances of extreme pressure. She turned to face the class directly. Some of you will exceed that distance. Some of you will establish new records, but you will do so by understanding that excellence is not a destination. It is a continuous process of refinement, discipline, and commitment to mastery. The 5,300-meter shot changed my life not because it was dramatic, but because it represented the culmination of years of preparation finally meeting opportunity. The training program Sarah had established had become revolutionary. It incorporated not just traditional marksmanship instruction, but psychological resilience training, ethical frameworks for combat decision-making, and advanced ballistics education that pushed the boundaries of conventional military training. Her graduates were winning competitions internationally. More importantly, they were saving lives in operational theaters worldwide. Military academies had begun teaching her 5,300-meter shot as in multiple disciplines simultaneously: ballistics, psychology, decision-making under pressure, and the dangers of institutional bias. The actual bullet hole at that impossible distance had become a pilgrimage destination for precision shooters from allied nations. Photographs of the impact site appeared in training manuals. The physics of that single shot was being analyzed in universities and military institutions globally. But Sarah remained grounded in reality. She understood that legends could become distorted, that mythology could overshadow truth. So she maintained rigorous documentation of everything: training protocols, ballistics data, psychological frameworks. She published extensively in military journals. She lectured at war colleges. She ensured that the principles underlying that legendary shot were accessible, teachable, replicable. One afternoon, Sarah returned to Forward Operating Base Sentinel for a surprise inspection and morale visit. The kitchen staff erupted in genuine joy when she appeared, still wearing her apron, ready to work. She spent 6 hours cooking alongside them, preparing an elaborate meal from scratch. As she worked, soldiers would pass through, shake her hand, thank her for the training they'd received from her program, share stories of their own successes in the field. "You taught me to believe in myself when everyone else was telling me I was broken," one young sergeant told her, tears in his eyes. "I was reassigned like you. I thought my career was over. Then I heard your story. I applied to your program. Now I'm one of the best marksmen in my battalion." Sarah listened to these stories with quiet intensity. This was the real legacy, not the famous shot, but the lives changed, the careers salvaged, the potential unlocked in soldiers who'd been written off by institutional politics and circumstance. Had become almost invisible. His name appeared occasionally in administrative reports, but he'd faded from active military consciousness. He served out his remaining years in a Pentagon office, processing paperwork, attending meetings with minimal attendance, representing nothing and inspiring no one. His story had become a cautionary tale rather than a career trajectory, a warning about what happened when ego and cruelty overrode professional judgment. The senior officer stateside had faced full courts-martial. The evidence of his intelligence failure, his deliberate concealment of updated coordinates, his systematic effort to scapegoat Sarah, it was all laid bare in formal proceedings. He was convicted and dishonorably discharged, his pension stripped, his military record permanently. Military justice had ultimately prevailed, though years too late. But the impact extended beyond individuals. The entire military system began examining how personnel were reassigned, how investigations were conducted, how junior officers and enlisted personnel could challenge potentially unjust decisions. Sarah's case became a catalyst for institutional reform. New protocols were established. New oversight mechanisms were implemented. The system couldn't guarantee perfect justice, but it could be significantly improved. 5 years after that legendary shot, Sarah was promoted to colonel. She established the Advanced Marksmanship Institute, a facility that trained not just American personnel but soldiers from allied nations. Her curriculum became the gold standard globally. Young snipers from Britain, Canada, Australia, and European allies all wanted to train under her instruction. And yet, Sarah never forgot the kitchen. She remained connected to the enlisted personnel, the support staff, the individuals whose dedication made everything else possible. She cooked meals for her trainees regularly. She worked alongside kitchen staff during her administrative leave. She maintained absolute humility about her achievements, understanding that all success was built on foundations laid by countless others. The valley where her shot echoed remained hallowed ground. Precision shooters from around the world visited that location, standing on the ridge where she'd made the shot, feeling the wind patterns, understanding the magnitude of what had been accomplished. It had become a place of pilgrimage, a location where military professionals went to test themselves against human possibility. But perhaps the most enduring legacy existed in the hearts of soldiers whose careers had been salvaged, whose potential had been unlocked, whose belief in themselves had been restored by her example. The cook had become colonel. The humiliated had become revered. The scapegoat had become the architect of institutional change. And every time a new recruit heard her story, they learned the most important lesson of all: that one perfect moment, executed with absolute precision and integrity, could change not just individual lives but entire systems. That resilience was more powerful than circumstance. That excellence could not be permanently suppressed. That truth, given time and opportunity, would inevitably emerge. Sarah's 5,300-meter shot had echoed through more than just that valley. It had reverberated through the entire military system, reshaping how soldiers understood possibility, justice, and the unstoppable power of disciplined excellence. The legend was no longer a whisper. It had become immortal.